Come on. Come on. Come on, here you come. Come on. Yes. Come on. Come on. Oh. Hi, friends. Didn't see you there. One moment. Sorry about that. Less than ideal introduction. Todd and I were hanging out with some friends and someone suggested getting a new game engine, and he got spooked, and I've been trying to bait him out with some old IP, but he's not coming. Give him some time. Actually, now's a good time to have caught you, because ideally, when this goes up, it will be the 10th anniversary of Skyrim's release, hopefully to the day, which is a big deal. 10 years of a game and it's still relevant and still well remembered. That's not common. Well, it is a bit, but it's still a big thing, and I'd like to talk about it. Skyrim is the 5th mainline entry in a series of fantasy role-playing games titled The Elder Scrolls, released by Bethesda, published by Bethesda. The subtitle, by which it's commonly known, is the provenance in which the game is set. Skyrim released to almost immediate critical praise and acclaim. People lauded it for being open-ended and free and explorative, and generally just a good time, lots of fun. So yes, happy birthday Skyrim, well done! Before we step forward into the tween years, let's look back at some notable moments from the first decade, and by that I mean this game's been released a lot of times, so we're going to count them like Sesame Street. Skyrim for the PS3 and Xbox 360, Skyrim for the PC, Skyrim Legendary Edition, Skyrim Special Edition for the PC, PS4 and Xbox One, depending on how we're counting these, Skyrim Special Edition for the Nintendo Switch, Skyrim Special Edition for Amazon Alexa, and Skyrim VR, so depending on how you count it, that's 9, 10, 7, go with 10, good number, 10 versions of the same game. Now obviously it's not really, because some of them were simultaneous releases for different consoles, and the Amazon Alexa one was a joke, but that's still a lot of versions of the same game. I mean, Fallout New Vegas is basically the best game ever made, and that only got PS3, Xbox 360 and PC, so Skyrim's got to be pretty fucking good, right? Well, as I say, it released to basically immediate critical acclaim. It garnered a dedicated, talented, and incredibly passionate modding community, which still remains active to this day, and it is commonly lauded as an instant classic. Although it did receive the criticism of being a bit buggy, actually quite a lot buggy. And instead of taking this feedback and saying maybe we should update our game engine, or in fact get an entirely new game engine that isn't a slightly updated version of a game engine from 1998, Bethesda instead said, "Wanna bet?" Skyrim's a role-playing game, or at least it tries to be. In RPGs, you usually explore big worlds and meet different characters who will often give you quests to do as you adventure around, so the sensible thing to do would be to judge the game based on these merits. I decided to play through both the Imperial Legion quest and the main quest. Yeah, I know I could have done a number of different quest lines, but I have other things to spend my time on. I did the Imperial Legion quest because it means I can talk about the Civil War, and that actually holds some pretty interesting ideas that I definitely like to get into. It's worth noting before I really sink my teeth into this that I did use an alternate start mod, so I spent a fair while wandering around Winterhold and Dawnstar before really getting into things. Anyway, the Imperial Legion quest starts when you either join the Imperial Legion while escaping from Helgen in the vanilla opening of the game, or when you come across some Imperials in the world and they say, "Hey, go get conscripted, what's the worst that could happen?" I got the second of these two options. In fact, I wasn't even at Helgen, which makes things a little awkward later on. It also takes away one of the main talking points of the Imperials versus Stormcloaks question, but more on that later. For the time being, though, I did the Imperial Legion quest before the main quest, because I thought it would be funny, so now I have to talk about them out of order in my review, or it won't make sense. Truly, my hubris will be my downfall. This quest hinges around a conflict going on in Skyrim between the Imperials, representatives of the Empire that rule over basically all of Tamriel, and the Stormcloaks, a group of patriotic rebels led by Ulfric Stormcloak, who apparently shouted the High King to death, and also we would have met him if I'd played the intro, but guess what, Chucklefucks? Despite what I'm going to say about this quest and this story, I think there was definitely the possibility of this being an interesting moral question. Not New Vegas tier, but definitely interesting. As it is, I think it's not explored very well, and the quests don't try to make you think about the choice that you made in interesting ways, or at all, really. The interesting part of the debate is the fact that in the vanilla opening of the game, the Imperials tried to execute you, and you probably escaped with a member of the Stormcloaks, so you're naturally more inclined towards them, and probably went to join up with them because Ralof told you to when you got to Riverwood. But having not played the vanilla opening of the game, I didn't get that same initial bias. I'll talk about this in more detail in a little bit, but before I get too caught up in everything, I should explain why this conflict is happening. Well, the Imperials think that Skyrim should be assimilated into their Borg collective of countries so that they can establish trade routes and make everyone abide by their laws, and the Stormcloaks think that Skyrim is for the Nords and if you're foreign you can get out. You know, this is awfully reminiscent of something. I can't place what, though? This conflict is, quite clearly, an attempt at a New Vegas-esque style of storytelling, where your political beliefs affect what side you choose. Credit where credit's due, they sort of managed it, but they're only about halfway there. The quest starts with meeting General Tullius. He's the general of the Imperial Legion and was sent in to try and quell the uprising. He tells you to talk to someone called Legate Ricker, who was literally a foot away from him, and of course, because we're the magical chosen one, we're going through an unusual initiation process. So we're going to clear out a fort.
This is a test. I don't think you're regular militia material. I want to see what you're capable of.
So now we need to officially join the Legion by taking an oath and getting some armor. The armor sucks, so I got rid of it. And now we basically follow Legate Ricker around and hope that we get to do something interesting. Our first mission as an official member of the Legion is to go to Corvinjund and recover the Jagged Crown. Why? I'm not sure. I think spite for Ulfric. Yo, hey, it's Hadvar. I'd know that guy if I'd played the vanilla opening. According to the wiki, he's generally pretty sorry he's brought you to your death. I'm glad he's here. He's actually quite a nice character. Anyway, we're probably supposed to be following orders, but I am here to do my own nut shit, so I storm through this place much like I would an orphanage on a Saturday night. Then there's a puzzle! The answer's written on this funny claw right in front of the door. There's a boss fight of little note, and then we eat a word that someone graffitied on a wall. I don't expect that will be important or relevant whatsoever. Now we have to take the crown back to General Tullius, who's like, I think it would be pretty funny if you went to the Jarl of Whiterun and were like, hey, I've got some documents for you to look at. Jarl Balgruuf is a little busy at the moment with some situation about a dragon, so I lie to him so he'll give me attention. If it works for my family, it works for political figures. Then I accidentally got arrested while he was talking. I went back inside and accidentally started the main quest. What a klutz I am. So absolutely nothing else happened, and I definitely didn't go raid a crypt and kill a dragon, I swear. The next part of this quest is basically just standing around waiting for the Jarl. After wasting an unreasonable amount of my time, he tells me to take an axe to Ulfric.
I expect a great deal of excitement in the city of Whiterun in the near future.
Ooh, that sounds jolly exciting. Is there going to be a party? On arriving back in Whiterun, we tell the Jarl about Ulfric's response, but it's okay because the Legion have come to help. This is jolly convenient because I stepped out of Dragon's Reach and literally everything was on fire, which it definitely wasn't when I arrived. So that was a surprise. Unfortunately, I was a little bit drunk at the time and fell down the stairs before I noticed. It's startling how sobering hellfire raining down from above can be. This was rather reminiscent of the times I've been in fights in real life, because there were lots of people running around, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing, and I immediately opened fire on the first living thing I saw. Also, there was an older woman. After the big pub car park punch-up, the Jarl tells all 7 soldiers that he's very pleased with us. Now, as dryly as I've been describing the events of this quest so far, it has at least been engaging and interesting. There was even a big set-piece fight with fireballs and everything. Unfortunately, this is where it ends. No, we haven't finished the quest, but it's not interesting anymore. From here on out, the quest consists entirely of, we need to capture this hold, go to a camp and meet Ricker. We need to capture this hold, go kill Stormcloaks. Except for the one time we get to do a cool espionage mission to blackmail information out of somebody. That's kind of fun, but that's just one quest. In the final quest for the Legion, we storm Windhelm with the goal of straight up fucking killing Ulfric if he won't cooperate with us. Spoiler alert, he won't. This bit of the quest is actually really fun. It's pretty challenging and really cool to see Windhelm barricaded up. There's something simultaneously strange and also exciting about using the pathways you kind of ignored up until then as clever tactical routes through the city.
Ulfric Stormcloak, you are guilty of insurrection, murder of Imperial citizens, the assassination...
Speak with Ulfric. He's expecting word from Whiterun.
Yes? Make it quick. I'm a busy man.
I interrupted them because I wanted to show Ulfric my Pokemon cards. So we beat the shit out of Paul Eiding and execute the Jarl. But other than the opening up to the big fight at Whiterun and this big fight in Windhelm, Everything in the middle is just go to a place and kill some Stormcloaks. The content of the quest is lacking. It's running to a fort and killing a bunch of Stormcloaks so we can weaken them and take their stuff. It would have been nice to have more quests that have different options and routes to engage role-playing or make you actually engage with the subject matter. The closest it comes to anything like that is the quest I mentioned before, where you do tactical espionage and bully the Thane of Riften into telling you where a supply carriage is. But there's still only really one outcome to the quest, and you can't use different skills to get there. Unfortunately, this is a problem thoroughly endemic in Skyrim, which is that your skills don't matter. In Fallout New Vegas, for example, the choices you make when leveling up have a genuine effect on how you play the game. If you put points into science, for example, you can get different outcomes to quests compared to someone who put points into sneak or barter. This is a core part of role-playing games, building out a character and having an experience relatively unique to that character. In Skyrim, when you first arrive in Riften, one of the guards tries to shake you down for money before you can go in. One of the speech options here is to say, this is obviously a shakedown, which has persuade in brackets. There's also an intimidate option. I was wondering if character build made any difference to this, so I did the scientific thing. I started a new character, beelined to Riften, and saved. With this brand new character, fresh out of the box, speech level 25 or 15 or whatever, the lowest it can be, I tried the persuade option, and it worked immediately. Then I reloaded, tried the intimidate option, and it failed, so I experimentally buffed my one-handed skill to 100 using console commands, pulled out a sword and tried again, and again. The intimidation option failed, so what's the fucking point? You have attacks to enter a place that is completely avoidable to literally everyone, regardless of character build. This doesn't reward players who built their characters differently or offer opportunities for role-playing. It's pointless, it's nothing. It doesn't even tell us anything about Riften, does it? I mean, I guess it's where the Thieves Guild are based, so maybe it's an introduction for that, but it's just fucking pointless. I don't know why this needs to be here. I'm just using this as an example because it was the first one that comes to mind when I think about it, but this is an issue that runs throughout Skyrim. There's never any opportunities for role-playing or getting into character, because it feels like the game is actively trying to pull you out of the experience at every turn. I hate to keep banging on about it, but Fallout New Vegas did this so much better a whole year before. In New Vegas, skill checks were something that had a noticeable effect on the game. If you don't have a high enough explosive skill in Ghost Town Gunfight, you can't convince Easy Pete to give you his dynamite, and therefore do not have dynamite in the big fight. If your barter isn't high enough, you can't get the owner of the shop to help out, and if you don't have high enough speech, Trudy won't even help. These are interesting consequences for people who've built their characters differently. Of course, the opening of New Vegas, it's more an exercise in who you don't have, because you haven't had time to raise up all your skills yet, but later on in the game, this offers really interesting differences for people who've played the game differently. Fine, so the quests are boring and repetitive, and all you're doing is combat. But that's not bad if the combat's fun, right? We'll come back to this one. Okay, credit where credit is due. At a surface level, this question about the difference between Imperials and Stormcloaks is interesting. You start off about to be executed by the Imperial Legion, and are probably rescued by Ralof, a member of the Stormcloaks. He tells you to head to Winterhold and join up with them, so you go join up, and then that quest never gives you the opportunity to explore the other side of the conflict. Whichever side you're on, the other side just turns into basic grunt enemies, only there to be killed. Alright, well, I guess that makes sense. If you joined a rebellion, they probably wouldn't have PowerPoint presentations on why the other side is actually very reasonable and sympathetic. But if you then go and talk to the other side, they don't do anything to try and tell you that your side is wrong. I started up a new character, yes, again, and I went to join the Stormcloaks. As soon as I joined up, I ran over to the Imperials to see if I could ask why they felt the way they did, or if they'd try and convert me. They don't. You can ask questions about why they believe what they do, and they kind of just give you some vague and uninformative world building. There's nothing here to make the player think about the consequences of their decision, and there really do seem to be some interesting ideas here. Legate Rika has an interesting bit of character where she's really defensive about the ban on worshipping Talos, because she secretly worships Talos. This is seen when you kill Ulfric.
Talos with you.
What was that, Legate?
Nothing.
Oh,
Just
and Legate.
saying goodbye.
There's tons of stuff like this all throughout the game. Moments where a character says something that implies they have depth or that there might be something greater going on, but it's just flavor text.
I'll never surrender Skyrim into the hands of a corrupt and dying empire.
In what way is the Empire corrupt or dying, Ulfric? Please, tell me. Try and convert me. Make me think about the moral ramifications of my decision. Are you just making this up because you're a shitty allegory for conservative politicians and just don't want other people from other provinces to come into Skyrim? Or are there actual issues with the Empire? If this is something that you truly believe in, you should be explaining it to me, because you want me to understand why you feel the way you do. This is what a real person would do in this situation. Legate Rika even says that the Empire is weakened because of their efforts in Skyrim. Maybe these are related. Perhaps it's an infinite loop of a conflict where Ulfric doesn't want to join the Empire because he sees them as weak and ineffectual, but they're weak and ineffectual because they're busy trying to crush Ulfric's rebellion. Please develop on this conflict, I beg of you! There's just nothing to this. It's infuriating to see because it's like briefly seeing the writers surface for air and cry for help before Todd pushes them back underneath the slurry to make more procedural quests. So what we have is a story which had the possibility of being almost New Vegas tier in promoting discussion and getting the player to engage with the subject matter, and falls short because the actual content of the quests is dull and repetitive, and the characters feel like they're desperately begging to be put in a game with better writing that will actually explore their own personal nuances and conflicts, and the gameplay doesn't inform the story in any way. Regat Licker could have been a really cool character and had a really cool story and arc about her personal issues regarding her loyalty to the Legion when compared to her clear tendency towards worshipping Talos. Maybe this could have been explored more for added depth. The player could have helped her reach a decision in some side quest. Hell, you could use speech checks to manipulate her into staying or leaving, and then add a nice coat of moral grey paint to these beige walls. The worst part about this is that this is, in my opinion, one of the better quests, because of these little tidbits of information hinting at something greater. Of all the quests in this game that feel bland and uninspired, this one's one of the most interesting. Yet it falls short of being engaging in basically all faculties. Look, I was going to say that maybe this is a one-off, and the other side quests are more interesting, but I kind of already know that they're not. Every now and then you get a good one, but really, they're side quests, so maybe the main storyline of the game will have more substance and depth to it.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Yes, Rayloff, I am. Skyrim starts with you, the player, or in this case, me. Also, the player being taken to die. Fortunately, a dragon called Alduin attacks the place you're going to be executed, which would be awfully rude of him under normal circumstances, but I'm willing to look the other way because of how beneficial it was to me this one time. While he stomps around destroying everything, the player is focused on running away with Rayloff, the man from the cart. He guides you through the destroyed town and through a cave just beneath it, and when you get out to the other side, he goes, "My sister is in Riverwood, go to her and tell her to give you shit." So you do that, and then she's like, someone should probably tell the Jarl of Whiterun or something about the big dragon, you know? And now the game has started. At this point, most people fuck off and do their own thing for like 30 hours, but as a seasoned gamer, I knew I needed footage of the main quest for my review, so I played through it. You run at top speed to Whiterun because the nice lady told you to, where you interrupt the Jarl mid-conversation to say, Dragon, Helgen, big fire. The Jarl is pretty pleased with this message and is like, yo, that's pretty cool. Okay, so you're talking to my personal wizard dude? He's got a job for you. The wizard dude is super chill and doesn't really care about the Civil War. Yeah, remember that? He just wants to get on with enjoying his books and learning to do cool shit with magic. I feel you, bro. That's what programming's like for me. He tells us to go to a decorative hole in the side of a mountain and get a big rock for him. Not just any rock, mind, the Dragonstone, a MacGuffin that will in some way help. Given how early this is going to be in the game, they do a really good job of making the crypt imposing, sitting menacingly atop a hill. I genuinely think it's an incredible, memorable moment, an exemplar of what Skyrim could do if it took its hands off the reins and let players explore the world more freely without feeling the need to point them at everything or mark it on a compass. When I played this for the first time, I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know what any of the compass indicators meant, so when I rounded a corner to see these giant archways, I was properly taken aback. Unfortunately, that feeling quickly faded when I realised what the icon on the compass meant, and it's extremely uncommon that anything is ever quite this drastic and exciting in Skyrim again. In terms of how imposing something seems as you approach it, the only thing that comes immediately to mind is the College of Winterhold, and you fight through another dungeon and get to the end where you fight a funny skeleton and eat another word. So we take the Dragonstone back to the court wizard who's hanging out with some hooded figure. At the time I was doing this quest though, I was a little preoccupied with the Imperial Legion, so I ignored them and ran off. There's a dragon hovering near one of the watchtowers and the Jarl says that we have to go help deal with it. There's a big fight with the dragon, which is challenging, sometimes to the point of being bullshit, but it's also kind of a nice spectacle, and I wouldn't expect a fight against a dragon to be fair, so I'll let it slide. When you kill it, the dragon bursts into flames and you consume your first dragon soul. And because it's our first dragon soul, it also immediately unlocks a shout. Usually you collect souls and can then choose which shout you want to unlock with it, but in this case we get the first word of Unrelenting Force. Apparently this means we're a thing called Dragonborn or something like that. And that means you can yell really loudly, so you get sent back to Jarl Bolgraf, and as you're walking back, I'm hungry. So basically the Jarl says that because I'm the main character, I now get to be the Thane of Whiterun, which means I can buy property in the city, and I have a housecarl called Lydia. She's gonna carry all of my heavy shit so I don't have to. Oh boy, I love being upper middle class. Now that I've acquired a big titty goth GF to carry all of my bags for me, I need to head to the top of a mountain to meet the Greybeards, who teach me another shout called Whirlwind Spirit, where you shout so loudly that the air behind you gets scared and pushes you forward about 20 feet. The Greybeards are a group of monks who all started a very gay, very polyamorous relationship and had to flee to the top of a mountain mountain to live in peace because Skyrim is very conservative and did not understand their love. They tell you to go find one of their sex aids called the Horn of Jurgen Windcaller, so named because that ass do fart. It's in a crypt called Ustengrav. Apparently these old codgers really used to get around. However, this isn't just another fetch quest, because the sex aid has been stolen and the thief has left a note. Dragonborn, I need to speak to you urgently. Rent the attic— hold on a moment, I can't read. Luckily, my new housecarl can, and she tells me that I need to go and rent a room at the inn in Riverwood. When I arrive in Riverwood, drunk and tired, the innkeeper tells me that they don't even have an attic room. I suspect that this friend of mine may be an idiot. Still, having rented a room, I may as well sleep through to the morning.
So you're—
Ah, what are you doing here? Have you heard of the High— Jesus Christ! Delphine, the stranger who scared my tits off, gives the horn back and asks me to follow her. Obviously stranger danger is the thing, so I don't. Fine, let's go see what she wants. Okay, so the Greybeards think I'm a Dragonborn, and this lady is very racist against Dark Elves apparently because they're causing the dragons to come back. Bloody typical of immigrants, am I right? Coming into our country, simultaneously lazily living off benefits and also stealing all of our jobs, and in the meantime summoning Nyarlathotep. Delphine makes a very good point that she beat me to the horn, so it's probably not a very good measure of proving one's worth, which was surprisingly self-aware for this game. Before I go to wherever it was Delphine wanted me to go, I have to just give the old dudes their horn back. In return, they teach me the next word of unrelenting force, which is cool, but then they shout at my head for a few minutes to see if I fall over. I finally catch up to Delphine, and we have a big scrap with a dragon on top of a hill, and it's pretty fun in a scripted action set piece sort of way. Another dragon soul claimed, and Delphine seems pretty convinced that we're the Dragonborn.
I owe you some answers, don't I?
I don't know, maybe. I just came along to kill a dragon. I asked some questions, but basically none of it is important. We meet back at Riverwood, and she tells me that I need to do a covert ops mission in the Thalmor Embassy, so that's pretty cool. That sounds like an interesting quest. And this is one of the more interesting quests in the game. And it still kind of sucks. Basically what happens is you meet a guy in Solitude, and because he works in the Thalmor Embassy but is a wood elf and therefore hates the other type of elf, he can smuggle all your gear into the quest for you. I like this concept. But it doesn't really add much, it just means you spend an extra couple of minutes wandering around without a sword, and it's basically the game's way of stopping you from committing any murders and derailing the quest. Once you're inside the embassy, you're supposed to talk to everyone and find out what's going on so that you can look for an opportunity to make a distraction. Unfortunately for the game, the first guy I spoke to, who incidentally is stood right next to a guard, says that he'll do anything for a drink. And I had just purchased a beverage to enjoy myself, so I give it to him, and he's like, "Cheers bro, anything I can do for you?" And I tell him to cause a fuss, and he does it entirely unquestioningly, and the guard, who once again is right fucking there, does absolutely nothing about it. While he causes a commotion, we can slip away, and from here all the interesting character stuff is over, and you're just wandering around the Thalmor Embassy with a sword trying to find a prisoner. There he is. He does not look to be enjoying himself at all. I ask him a few questions, and he basically tells me that there's some dude called Esbern somewhere in Riften, so I let him go and lead him out through a troll cave. Sadly, the guy who got our stuff into the embassy dies, and I am assuredly sad about this. What was his name? Delphine says that Esbern is probably hiding in the Rataway, and that I should go talk to some dude called Brynjolf because he's well connected. Okay, I'm already getting bored, and I want to talk about different stuff, so let's speed this up. In Riften, a guy tries to talk to me and demand that I do work for him, but because I am by no means short of gold, I ignore him. Esbern is hiding in the Ratway and is really easy to convince out. The actual Ratway dungeon isn't particularly interesting, but it's pleasantly maze-like, so I can't complain. Yes, I can, and I will. Also introduces you to the Thieves Guild. I take Esbern back to Riverwood, and he and Delphine decide that they need to find Alduin's Wall, which is also in a dungeon, but it's a really nice dungeon with rather pleasant spectacle. And also a really big face, what the fuck? This big temple is apparently the old home base of the Blades, so I pillage a bunch of their shit, and look at the big funny wall. The Blades say I need to learn a shout to pin Alduin to the ground, so I go back to the Greybeards and they're like, "And where do you think you've been, young man?" But after a little bit of convincing, they let you talk to the big boss of the Greybeards who lives on top of their mountain. He's a dragon, what the fuck? I told you they were into some kinky shit. He's fun to talk philosophy with, but he doesn't know the shout we need, big stupid lizard, so we have to go and find a bit of paper called an Elder Scroll.
Not the kind of thing you will find in your local bookshop. Let me think.
Perhaps the College of Winterhold.
Esbern, what the fuck happened to your voice? The librarian at the College of Winterhold says that some old fucker called Septimus might know something, but he disappeared years ago, so we go north to the ice field, and he's just living in a hole in the ground like a mad hermit doing his own thing. He disappeared 30 years ago. How? He gives us 2 keys and points us in the direction of a Dwemer ruin, which I obviously have to fight my way through, albeit while mildly inebriated. At the end of it is a boss fight against some big steam robot, and oh my god, that wasn't even the end of the dungeon, it just keeps fucking going. going, you have to solve a puzzle with buttons and the funny objects that the Mad Hermit gave us, but eventually the thing opens up and we can take the scroll. Awesome. We go back to Parthenax's mountain. Also, yeah, the dragon who's top dog of the Greybeards is called Parthenax, and he's not a dog, he's a dragon. We read the scroll and see the past where a bunch of cool heroes stood on top of the mountain and yelled at a dragon until it fell over. Then Alduin shows up. What the fuck? So there's a big boss fight with him. Again, very cool in spectacle. In gameplay, I hid behind a rock and shot arrows at him. Parthenax is like, we must make one of the dragons tell us where Alduin is hiding. That funny castle in Whiterun was built to hold a dragon. Go trap one there. This is how to shout one of their names. So we go talk to the Jarl of Whiterun, and he goes, yeah, sure, why the fuck not, Lamau? So we go to the top of Dragons Reach and yell out of the window, I have had sexual intercourse with your mother. After another pub car park punch-up, we get the dragon trapped inside and talk to him, and he's like, yeah, I mean, I guess Alduin can be a bit of a dick. He drank the last of my apple ciders that I left in the communal fridge, even though it totally had my name on it. So he tells us that Alduin is hiding in heaven. What? And you can only get to heaven by riding on the back of a dragon? That's what you think, motherfucker. But if we do it like this, we get to ride a dragon, which is really cool, so we do that instead. There's a big fight as I try to get into heaven, and a bunch of undead people and dragons are in the way, which, yeah, sure, I guess. Then I actually get to heaven and meet a bunch of ancient heroes. And also Ulfric, who you'll recall I killed, so that was really awkward. The destined heroes and I have a big fight with Alduin. I leave heaven and go back to the land of the living. All the dragons fly around and have a big shout, and that's it. We're done. Okay, good. Finally, I'm done with the recap. I only really wanted to get through all of that to make a point about the story. Okay, you remember that opening quest to Fallout New Vegas that I mentioned earlier, Ghost Town Gunfight? Well, as well as a bunch of skill checks that affect small things, there are also a bunch of choices I intentionally didn't mention, such that I could bring them back later being now. So the opening quest to Fallout New Vegas regards an argument between the town of Goodsprings and a group of raider wannabes called the Powder Gangers. They want to kill someone who came to Goodsprings in search of refuge for them, and most of the people in Goodsprings don't want that. You're tasked with talking to all of the residents of Goodsprings and helping the man find a way to avoid being taken by the Powder Gangers. However, you also have the option of going and talking to the leader of the Powder Gangers, who'll get you to go and kill the man for them, as well as then taking over Goodsprings. Even better, you have the option of helping one faction eliminate the other, and then turning on the faction you chose. Every single NPC can be freely killed, and the game finds a way to muddle on. My point is that you have freedom and choices in how you let the game play out. This isn't just in Goodsprings either. This permeates through the entire game and means you can have a number of different endings depending on which side quests you did, which paths you took through those side quests, as well as which decisions you made in the main quests, which factions you sided with, all of it. A huge part of any role-playing game is that each player can have a different experience based on how they build their character and how they choose to play. You can be a magic user or a sneaky thief who steals intel from people and navigates around problems. In games like New Vegas, this can have a big effect on how everything plays out, and that's fantastic. Your character has had a tangible effect on the world based on how you've molded them. And that's incredible for immersion, because that character is now in the world. They're not just some abstract creation floating along the top of it. Skyrim has none of that. Instead, Skyrim has an entirely linear plot that at no point encourages the player to build their own character to suit how they want to play. Sure, you can spec into magic and weapons, but they only ever have an effect in combat. Yeah, of course weapons are going to have an effect on combat, Ian. Yes, you dullard straw man, but they could have affected other things too. Like conversations. What if I was in a conversation with an NPC, and he was only going to give me a certain bit of information if I did a fetch quest for him? And let's say my speech wasn't high enough to persuade him to just outright tell me. What if I could use an illusion spell to convince him that he has the item he wanted to send me to get? Surely that's facilitation of role-playing and giving players different options. I'm so sick of play it your way, you can either stealth it or go in guns, swords blazing. If it's a role-playing game, give my skills different applications outside of combat. Using that same example, what other options could we have? We've got a speech option to persuade him to just tell us the information without doing a fetch quest. We can use illusion to make him hallucinate the quest MacGuffin. We can use strength or a weapon stat to intimidate him. But these things should have an effect. Lying or threatening the shopkeeper could cause your karma to fall if we're doing a simple binary moral choice thing, but my personal preference would be to have a New Vegas-esque reputation system, so the people of that village and surrounding area think you're a bit of a dick, but people elsewhere don't really know about it. And this isn't some kind of world-changing event that has an effect on how all the factions perceive you and changes what endings you get. It's a tiny little thing that facilitates role-playing in this role-playing game. That's how skills should work in role-playing games. That's what conversations should be like in role-playing games. Decisions, options, and consequences for your actions. Skyrim has none of this. You recall we already talked about one of the only speech checks in the game in Rift, and I'm basically just rehashing that point, but that's because it's important. And this game doesn't recognize that it's a role-playing game. I do not feel like I'm playing a role. Look, I should confess something. This is the first time I'd ever finished the main quest in Skyrim. I'd got to the point of asking the Jarl of Whiterun if I could keep a dragon in his house, and then the game bugged out and I couldn't finish it. So this was the first time ever going through it properly. And while I knew that the side quests didn't exactly have branching narratives or multiple outcomes, I figured that at least the main quest would. That I held out some naive hope that my character could really have an effect on this world. But the only choice you ever make in this game is whether you side with the Stormcloaks or the Imperials, and that just changes what colour everyone's wearing. In retrospect, I suppose it was rather naive of me to assume that a role-playing game would have more than one ending, or really an ending at all. The main quest in this game feels less like a core plot thread and more like just another of the many side quests that are picked up and then forgotten about so that we can go back to dicking about in the open world. It gives me absolutely no incentive to play through the game again now that I've finished it, because, well, why would I want to? It's going to play out exactly the same no matter what I do. At least Fallout 3 had different endings, fuck. So yeah, the main plot of this game is somehow worse than the one side quest I chose to play out of all the possible options, and it's disappointing. I'm disappointed. That's this point, that's this section. Side note, from here on out I'm going to be extremely critical of a lot of things in this game. I'm going to be pointing out flaws left, right and centre. There is a section a little later on where I come back to these ideas that I mentioned and talk about how to improve on them. I'm not just going to sit here and go, game bad. Alright, so you may have picked up on the fact that you spend a lot of time in dungeons in Skyrim. Crypts, caves and crevices are absolutely everywhere, and you stumble across one what feels like every 5 minutes. This is fine, I guess. It's kind of a dungeon crawler type deal. It's not fine, that's a lie. It really has an impact on the feeling of the world, but I'll get into that in a moment. Skyrim's stated intention right out of the gate is player freedom and exploration, and you can just wander off in whatever direction you please and see what you stumble across, and for the most part, it's pretty good at it. At first the world feels big and brimming with possibilities, and then you stumble across 3 different caves in the span of 10 minutes, and they're all kind of identical, and the world starts to lose its vastness somewhat. On an entirely unrelated note, I think we should talk about the different kinds of open world in games. So, in my opinion, there are kind of 2 distinct categories of open world. First, there's the games where the open world is part of the experience, critical to the experience in fact. This is things like Minecraft, Just Cause 3, Subnautica, Breath of the Wild, things where exploration and experimentation are fundamental to the core experience the game is going for. Then there's the open world that simply serves to stick a commute between missions. This goes for things like Assassin's Creed, Mirror's Edge, Catalyst, Grand Theft Auto 5, although GTA and by extension Red Dead Redemption 2 have some slightly more complicated issues at play, which is one of the many reasons that the second part in my Red Dead Redemption 2 review has been pushed back so much. Anyway, I like to think that Skyrim comes in the first category. It kind of wouldn't work without being an open world game. You wander around this big, vast landscape and just run across things. Sometimes you'll be walking along and a dragon will attack you out of nowhere. Perhaps you're just strolling down a path and run into a bard or a courier, or some prisoner escort. Basically, there are a number of different things that the game can throw at you at any different time, and these are often tied to specific characters or locations, so there's some pleasant consistency between them. But the thing is, and there's no easy way to say this, but Skyrim's cluttered, I suppose. Going back to my earlier idea about there being 2 different types of open world in games, there are a couple of exceptions. One of my personal favourites is Elite Dangerous. In fact, I have a little thing I like to call the Elite Principle, which states that your explosive space battles feel all the more tense and exciting because they're the exception rather than the rule. Normally you're just an average space trucker flying from place to place selling nutrient blocks and bandages. Incidentally, this is one of my biggest problems with modern military shooters like Call of Duty. I immediately become desensitized to all the action because I've got nothing to compare it to. Now, being an RPG, like we talked about earlier, Skyrim only partially suffers from this issue. In towns and villages, things all work fine, you're talking to NPCs, it's chill. But when you start exploring the world, the fact that there's so much going on at any one time takes away any atmosphere or tension the game tries to build. And I'm going to have to talk a little more about atmosphere later on in this section, because Skyrim does atmosphere beautifully, but it's spoiled by the fact that I can't take a moment to drink it in without being attacked by fucking wolves. Being attacked by every carbon-based lifeform in a 10-mile radius is only really interesting when it's uncommon rather than the norm, and in Skyrim, it's the norm. The world feeling cluttered means that it has less time to focus on what it's good at because it's too busy worrying that people will get bored and go do something else. which is also why it showers you with rewards for completing any given dungeon. And these dungeons, which we've just established are absolutely everywhere, are pretty liberal in how they disgorge things like treasure. And this alone I wouldn't mind, but the loot is just disinteresting. It's always just gold, or maybe a weapon that's worse in basically every way to whatever weapon you already had. More often than not, I'd come out of a dungeon with more health potions than when I went in, and that's just ridiculous. The early game is good fun, because every cave, dungeon, and crypt you come across is worth exploring in case you get some cool weapon or enchanted bit of armor. But after not very long, they stop being any better than what you've already got, and you can't really justify the carry weight to get it back to town. This is all exacerbated by the level scaling, so you can't even go back to the hardest dungeons for an extra challenge, so all these ancient crypts sat atop hills of a bygone age manage to end up feeling routine and samey. This is all made even more annoying by the fact that I do want to explore these areas. I honestly do. Bethesda has an amazing way of pouring huge amounts of love and care into fine details and making a world that's beautiful, and I want to explore it. One of the very few things that Fallout 76 does really well. It stands out head and shoulders above games like The Division, where you're stomping around a really nicely modelled streets of DC, but it doesn't feel like any thought has been put into it. There was some conflict, so there's some decrepit cars or something, whatever. No, Bethesda games are richly atmospheric. They are subtle and quiet at times. Fallout 3 had a thick tension in the air whenever you're exploring the wasteland, and Fallout 4 builds its atmosphere with exploring the wasteland and then having the radio on to just add the jauntiness to it. Morrowind has a lovely atmosphere in towns and villages, and it's really effective. It makes me want to spend time in these worlds. This is all made even better by environmental storytelling, and they're usually full of things like that. They're usually full of little things that don't have some big quest associated with them, but tell a story nonetheless. And that is what I would call a segue into talking about environmental storytelling, because this isn't an entirely negative review. Rather upsettingly, the best stories in this game are the ones that don't have any people in them, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be incredibly effective to find something after the fact and try and piece together what happened there, and Skyrim does this incredibly well. For example, as I made my way across the wilderness during the Imperial Legion questline, I came across this building. It had been crushed by a fallen tree, and the person who owned it, called Lucky Lawrence, had died. Well, I don't remember there being anything telling the player that the owner was called Lucky Lawrence, other than that just being their name when you hover over them. I still think it's a brilliant bit of storytelling. There's no quest marker here either, no quirky NPC sending you to investigate what happened to their friend. It's just something you can stumble across in the world, and it's fucking glorious. I absolutely adore this way of getting stories across in games, and Skyrim does it really well, and does it a lot. Another example that springs immediately to mind is Frostflow Lighthouse. Okay, this time it's got a quest marker, but there are still no living NPCs associated with the quest. And you just have to wander around the lighthouse and figure out what happened there based on notes and environmental details. These are the points where the love and care that went into this game shines through, and as I said, it's something that all of Bethesda games do incredibly well. This bit of Fallout 3, for example.
The funniest thing in the game is at Raven Rock, the Enclave base. You'll notice the mess hall floor is a metal grating. Well, if you go underneath it, you'll find a ton of knives and forks. People kept dropping them and losing them down the grating.
When Bethesda embraces this idea, that's when their games absolutely shine. As I said earlier, it's one of the few things that Fallout 76 does right. But Skyrim often feels like it's not doing that, because it's too busy copy and pasting the same 3 dungeons over and over again. And that lets it down. It doesn't give the world room to breathe, it doesn't give the world room to tell its own stories. Instead, it feels it has to guide the player through everything and numb them. It, in places, feels remarkably like a live service game like Destiny 2, designed not to enrich the senses or relay an interesting story, but just get you addicted to the core gameplay loop so that you keep logging in every day, which is weird because Skyrim isn't an online game. Okay, so I've talked about the world, but like, what are you actually doing? Well, other than wandering around talking to people, of course. Usually, you're looking for treasure and fighting through dungeons. In fact, not just dungeons, but hordes of the undead in the combat. It sucks. Okay, I suppose that's not quite fair. I should elaborate and provoke discussion. Alright, so let's talk about Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a game which, unlike Skyrim, has very little active story. There's a bunch of setup and lore that explains who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, but in the game there are very few cutscenes and only a few characters will spend your time with. Instead, you're going to spend most of your time in combat. You're going to be dodge rolling, parrying, and hack and slashing your way through. Dark Souls' combat is designed to feel deliberate. Technically, you can have all sorts of different playstyles with magic and pyromancies and all sorts of shit like that, but really, that's not as fun as using a big fuck-off sword. And there's a big difference between melee and ranged builds in Dark Souls, and that's feedback. Melee weapons feel good to use, while still managing to remain unique mostly. The smaller swords are slick and flashy, the combat's still extremely deliberate, obviously, but the heavier weapons, like the big fuck-off ultra great swords, are extremely slow but come crashing down with the force of 1,000 suns, and the game really makes you feel that. Every single swing with one of those bad boys is just such a powerful feeling, but why? What about Dark Souls' combat feels good, and why doesn't Skyrim feel the same? Well, let's talk about reactivity, or feedback. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I walk up to someone in the street and punch them in the fucking face. I will see you in court, Henry, you know what you did. If I was to do this, that person would likely react by recoiling away before proceeding to punch my teeth down my throat because I picked a fight with someone much stronger than me. In Skyrim, however, if I walk up to someone and punch them in the fucking face, you'll see they sort of just stand there and take it. This isn't good for immersion. It lends to this feeling that these people aren't real. They're just these hollow reflections of people. Don't get me wrong, Fallout New Vegas has this issue as well, and I will praise that game till the day I die. But the thing is, Fallout New Vegas has actual role-playing elements to make up for it. Alright, look at it this way. In Ghost Runner, when you slice a man in half, they just fucking... Dude, yeah! I just split that man's atom yeah! God, I must be on so many watch lists right now. Look, I swear I'm not dangerous, it's just, yeah, he's fucking dead! But the point I was going to make before I got distracted separating men from their legs was that in Ghost Runner, every single hit is impactful. You really know you've made contact. Now, this is something that's hard to quantify. I really struggle to explain why one game feels good, where another doesn't. Especially without being able to see how the underlying hit detection works. And the best I can find on this matter is that in Skyrim, it basically doesn't. In Ghost Runner, the rules about combat detection are clear. Like, I know how far away I have to be from an enemy in order to make contact, and I know that when I make contact, the hit detection will work, so it feels fair. The reason, as far as I can grasp, that Skyrim doesn't feel good is that it's some combination of the fact that most of my swings don't actually make obvious visual contact with the enemy, they kind of just float in front of them, and the enemies then don't visibly react to what is ostensibly, according to the health bar at least, a hit, thus lending the combat a feeling of weightlessness. I guess, yeah, compared to Ghost Runner's I know how far away I have to be, etc., Skyrim feels more like standing and breathing heavily at each other until one of you falls down. Honestly, I think that even if the hit detection was still crummy, if the enemies reacted properly and consistently, it would at least be a marginal improvement. Obviously, recoil animations aren't all of it, but they're a pretty big part of it. I made a local multiplayer fighting game not too long ago for school, and basically everyone said that the combat felt kind of weightless and floaty until I added recoil animations, and everyone went, yeah, the combat still feels weightless and floaty, but at least I know I'm making contact now. So, with that in mind, is it any wonder that people naturally gravitate towards the stealth archer build? It's infinitely more satisfying to dispatch someone silently from the bushes than to stand in front of them flailing for 15 seconds before one of you falls over. Sometimes enemies do react, of course, but it's just simply too inconsistent to really notice. That being said, I guess the combat is varied enough to do the job, it gets you through all the dungeons, but it feels insubstantial, so when it's paired with the rather anemic RPG elements and mediocre story, the entire game is left feeling dull, empty, and unfocused, and that's sad. For a game with an overwhelmingly positive review on Steam, and a game which I wrote a positive review for a while ago, it doesn't feel deserving of a lot of the praise I used to give it. So, I may have given a rather negative impression so far. Looking back over this video as it currently stands, I seem to be pretty down on Skyrim, which is surprising given that my overall memory of the game remains positive. Foreshadowing. But most of my points seem to be sound criticism. I expect they were written by a jolly attractive and clever young man. So instead of just bitching unconstructively, how would I actively build a better Skyrim? One that's closer to what I wanted from a role-playing game, that's still relatively accessible to mainstream audiences. I specify this because, you see, I started out with this section writing up the ideal game for me, and I recognise that I am not exactly a mainstream audience, so I'm going to try and set out with a similar brief to what I expect Todd Howard probably set out with, and create a concept for what I would have wanted from Skyrim. My brief, in brief, is to pen an idea for Skyrim that feels both accessible to newcomers to the series and like a worthwhile role-playing game. This means mechanic changes, but the story will stay the same. That is a little bit of a shame, but there really is only so much I can feasibly tackle. So, first things first, let's look at the exploration. Seeing as it's what the game wants to be its core gameplay, the obvious thing to do here is make it actual gameplay. What, I hear you thinking? Well, if we make it so that the in-game compass only shows you north, south, east, and west, and doesn't tell you what everything is 15 minutes before you come across it, then the player is more encouraged to explore. Now, in an ideal world, this wouldn't be built on, creation engine and would therefore have a draw distance that doesn't suck used teabags, and the expansive horizons could actually intrigue the player into exploration. So let's also say that instead of using big fat quest markers for objectives, NPCs actually give the player directions to different things throughout the world by saying things like, Whiterun is just north of Riverwood, you can't miss it, it's the big hold on the hill as soon as you exit the tree line. Before you go, thank you for being so wonderful and generous to our cause, Mr. Nord. Or, follow the river north until you drown and rid the world of your filth, Imperial scum. You know, actually make the player engage with the world they're in. I mean, you can even have it as an option. You can already turn off floating quest markers in the game. Why not just make it an option on the compass as well? Then the player can choose how involved they want to get. Also, encounters in the overworld need to be turned right the fuck down. I want to be able to just explore this world. Make it seem bigger by having fewer wandering traders and frostbite spiders and wolves, especially the fucking wolves. I have killed so many wolves in this game, I could carpet every single wall, floor, and ceiling in my house with wolf pelts, and still have enough left over for 8 fur coats. Okay, so if exploring the world is kind of enjoyable now, let's stop it from getting stale by rebalancing the rewards. Let's make the game disgorge gold far less often. Instead, how about we replace that gold with something else, like more varied, unique weapons and armor? Fun shit with cool enchantments. Sure, some players will just sell it for gold or rip the enchantment out of it to use on some other bit of equipment, but if we give each item a unique skill, not just an enchantment, kind of like legendary equipment in Fallout 4, you know, a kind of buff to a certain stat, it'll make them worth exploring for. Also, fewer health, stamina, and magic potions. There's far too many of them, and it means that the challenge drops out of all gameplay with an audible comical flute slide. Alright. I know I'm a massive weirdo who likes difficult games, but that does come with the caveat that the difficulty has to be fun, not the wasting my time and annoying me kind of challenge that things like Hitman can slip into, a sort of, if you make a mistake, then just keep making them type thing. I like the Dark Soulsian feeling of, aha, I've memorized all of your patterns and moves and remembered to sharpen my halberd this time, boss monster. Although the line that separates those two things can be subjective. Anyway, let's change the way difficulty works in the game. So instead of the usual system of just changing enemy health and damage, as well as player damage, to make the game easier or harder, what if we change different things? So for starters, let's throw in some light survival elements. Maybe you have to eat and drink 2 to 3 times a day and sleep once a day. I think these should be optional, seeing as they're absolutely not for everyone, but they're there as an added challenge for people who want them, like survival mode in Fallout 4. However, food doesn't heal you anymore, so players need to use health potions, and we're giving them fewer of them, so now maybe they have an incentive to learn magic. But let's say that higher difficulties do change player health, incoming damage, etc., just to a much lesser extent. So now let's also make that difficulty affect the loot tables to balance things. So on higher difficulties, you get even fewer potions and arrows, spells cost more magic to use, and maybe you can get less XP for doing things, so you have to think more about how you play. Obviously, these things shouldn't be like gargantuan changes, but just enough that you notice it on higher difficulties. And that should make the challenge feel much more natural, because the game's giving you less health, so you have to be more conservative with how you fight, as opposed to, I'm on a high difficulty, so a basic enemy takes 5 arrows in the mouth to kill, because apparently he ate Flintstone gummies that morning. This would even work well with the level scaling, because the world continues to feel like a threat as you keep playing, rather than becoming insultingly easy, while never being so hard that you get stuck in a dungeon, run out of arrows, and completely fuck up your save. Maybe the item scarcity thing would work better in Fallout, but don't get me started on fucking Fallout. That could be its own hour-long rant, ironically created as Fallout of this video. So, it's harder to find healing potions, encouraging the player to learn to do alchemy or magic, or even increase their speech stats so they're easier to buy. Now, touch on the combat. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, weapons degrade as you use them, slowly getting weaker and weaker over time, and I think that would really work in Skyrim. As you fight through dungeons, your weapons slowly chip away and your armor develops dents and kinks. Not a massive overbearing thing, but it's something to keep an eye on as you go around, sometimes encouraging you to find a smithing station or head into town to invest in repairs or replacements. It should never be a huge problem. We're not talking Dark Souls 2 weapon degradation here, just something that the player might need to keep an eye on. Then there's the skill checks, which I've already talked about quite a lot. But let's mention it again. Fallout New Vegas style skill checks to facilitate roleplaying. Perhaps things like the Thieves Guild having a minimum required stealth level to get in, or the College of Winterhold actually checking your magic, or asking you to do something difficult rather than just going, here, cast a spell at the ground. Also, main quests should definitely have had more skill checks and more routes through them, but I've already talked about that plenty, but seriously. And finally, just for good measure, let's throw in the nice lighting from Realistic Lighting Overhaul, just to give everything a little extra sheen. That is, I suppose, what I'd aim for as a cross between a more hardcore role-playing experience that I'd want and the accessible game I think Bethesda wanted to make. Presumably this can all be achieved with mods. I know a lot of it can. I've done a lot of it with mods. But it's hard to recommend a game to someone and then say, but here's all the setup you should do first, because they're not going to want to put the effort in when they don't know if they'd enjoy it or not. And it's a shame that in order to make the game involving and not completely bland and repetitive, I have to invoke the modding community. That's disappointing to me. So if somehow this has any effect on the real world, think about this stuff for Elder Scrolls 6, fellas. Right, so you will notice that it's I look different, and I'm wearing different clothes, and it's a different day, and also I'm sat at my desk rather than stood in the middle of my room. Yeah, so I was going through my footage, and it transpired that a bunch of my entire conclusion was super quiet, and the camera cut out halfway through, which is like, that's great. I love that. So we're gonna just give that another go now. When I first set out on this project, I was planning on making this a celebration of Skyrim, kind of talking about how great the game is. Unfortunately, as I wrote the script, this section kind of evolved into me talking about the mods, although at one point the entire video was just talking about the modding community, and I don't think that's very helpful or constructive criticism. And now the review's kind of taken on a rather bleak tone, as I've come to some pretty uncomfortable realizations about a game I thought I really liked. And I'm left with more questions than answers after this video. I'm left wondering why I have such fond memories of Skyrim, and why it left such a profound effect on both me and the entire rest of gaming culture at the time. I'm even left wondering how it did all that when a number of the games coming out in the same year were so much stronger than it, and how much of this game is so shallow and bland by comparison. I wonder if maybe it's the climate that's changed, you know. Back in 2011, the biggest releases were games like Dead Space 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Crysis 2, Duke Nukem Forever, Gears of War 3, and Uncharted 3, largely linear third-person cover shooter action games, with very little variation or choice. Now, obviously, Skyrim's not great for variation and choice, but, you know, it's not... I can't in all good conscience call the entire game linear, just the quests. Sure, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood was open world, but, you know, it's still just a linear plot thread with a commute between it. Perhaps Skyrim just offered us the opportunity to drink in the fresh air in a vast world, and hills rolling beneath our feet, and stepping down into any number of crypts to rummage around and find gold, and perhaps now that every single AAA game feels the need to sacrifice itself at the altar of open world gaming, it retroactively seems stale and uninspired as a result. And that's something that we simply couldn't have expected at the time. But on the other side of the same coin, other games that came out in 2011 were things like Mass Effect 2, Dragon Age 2, Dark Souls, The Witcher 2, Terraria, which it turns out came out like 7 months before the Minecraft beta came out, and like, what? I always thought Terraria was copying Minecraft, but you know, there we go. I learned a thing. Yeah. Also, Minecraft. The point is that anything Skyrim offered was available elsewhere, and yet any of those games are quite Skyrim adjacent, you know? Dark Souls' world and levels are about these like finely tuned structured encounters, whereas Skyrim is the equivalent of a big fucking field with goblins fired at it from an elephant gun. The Witcher is about genuinely interesting characters and conflicts and branching narratives that interweave beautifully. I'm flapping my hands, sorry, I haven't talked properly in a few days. And Skyrim's more like just some quests and characters to encourage you to explore the world. Minecraft gives you the freedom to build a temple on top of a snowy mountain, whereas Skyrim puts the temple on top of the snowy mountain and tells you to go talk to the old gay monks who live at the top. So it offers direction while still being open enough that you can go anywhere, even if you're not particularly challenged. You can find characters and never really get engaged, kind of skimming along the top of it like a stone. But it still gives you enough of a push to go around and explore further. Skyrim gives the illusion of choice, but it's a lie. It's a really well told lie, and one that's kept me placated and numb while the world falls to ruin around me, and that's okay. It's not quite like Fallout 4, where they fucked up the role-playing significantly enough that I actively dislike it. It's not so repetitive, or it doesn't feel so repetitive or numbers-based that I can get angry about the Pavlovian response it gave me to the sound of a purse of gold, which I absolutely would get angry about in something like Borderlands or Destiny. It's just nice to be in. It's a nice world. And it's simple and easy, and sometimes that's what I want. Sometimes I simply cannot cope with the world around me. And in those moments, stepping into the bleak and depressing world of Dark Souls isn't going to make me feel better. But Skyrim lets those troubles fade away for a short minute. It's going to end up in the annals of gaming history, like, whatever happens, you know, my video isn't going to change anything. It's going to be regarded as a modern classic, not because it's as masterfully crafted as Dark Souls, or as well written as New Vegas, or as innovative as Minecraft, but it is something else. It's not quite as describable, but it is truly wonderful, and I dare say rather unique. Only Bethesda make Bethesda games. Well, I guess Cyberpunk is kind of a Bethesda role-playing game, in a sense. I wish the game's characters, writing, and story were better, and I wish that the combat was much better. I wish the gameplay was less dull and repetitive, and I wish that it facilitated role-playing and immersion and all of that, even the tiniest bit, but I just can't care, I guess. I can get my hate on for Bethesda and their more recent anti-consumerist bullshit practices, and I can point at a lot of the games they've made and go, these weren't as good as we remember them being. But not Skyrim. I don't know, the pretentious critic in me hates that I'm being this soft, that I'm going this easy on a game when I know that it doesn't have the artful value that it claims to have, or that people claim it has. When somehow the bastion of Western RPGs is this. Just this once, I'll let it slide. I just wish the draw distance wasn't so fucking atrocious. Oh, bloody hell. I thought I could go through a paragraph without saying something negative. Well, I really like the way...